Hello and welcome to How Money Really Works, the podcast where we explain how money, markets and politics actually affect real people's lives. I'm Peter.
I'm Stephen.
And today we're talking about uncertainty, tariffs, tax planning for the future, and why earning money in Britain increasingly doesn't feel like getting richer.
So, quick reminder before we start, this is financial education, not financial advice. Let's get into it.
Right, well, where could we start but in Davos? And with the news coming out on Wednesday, just as we record, that Donald Trump has delivered a much anticipated address that's rattled markets and diplomats alike. Standing in front of crowds of world leaders, he reiterated his push to acquire Greenland, calling for immediate negotiations on a deal with Denmark and saying the United States wouldn't use force, but is still insisting that only the United States can guarantee the island's strategic security. Now, Trump's remarks have again raised tension with European allies. They come amid threats of tariffs on European countries that resist this plan. It's also a stance that Canada has publicly opposed, and as European leaders try to present a united front. So, really, Stephen, this is a big situation right now. We've got Donald Trump saying he's having Greenland. He's holding off a little bit and he's saying, I don't want to use military. I don't want to get the military involved, but only the US can have Greenland. So when a sitting president uses a forum like Davos to link geopolitical demands, territorial strategy, and of course the tariffs that he's threatening, 10% initially rising to 25% on, let's face it, allies who are opposing a land grab. So when you've got that, and that's all fed directly into market pricing and business confidence, how does it all look for the consumer and our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, have I had a sitting president say these things? Has anybody had a sitting president say these things or act this way? So the short answer is I don't know normally. Generally speaking, when it comes to tariffs, what tends to surprise people is just how quickly it starts to show up before anything's officially even implemented. There's a bit of a myth around tariffs because despite Donald thinking they're beautiful, they're actually a tax on imports that they get passed on to the consumers. So markets don't wait for certainty. They price that risk in straight away. Last night, we saw almost immediately falls overnight on Wall Street and again first thing this morning in London. Interestingly, it's 4:30, markets over in America have opened up relatively positively. So we're talking about volatility, right? That's what happens. People notice it because if they sign into their app to see the value of their shares or the value of their pension, it's going to be bouncing around a lot. So yeah, what do we normally see? It's the same things we've talked about in the last few episodes. Nobody likes uncertainty. And this particular president, that just doesn't just follow him around. That's something he really actively thrives in creating. So for households, it's rarely one big price jump. It'll be lots of small increases that quietly add up. Imported goods, transport, energy intensive products, everyday normal essentials. That's why people start to feel poorer, even when wages are rising. It's because the pressure builds in the background rather than all of a sudden straight at once. So no, I haven't had a situation as a financial advisor where I've had to deal with a president like this one, but we've got him, and this is where we are now. From your perspective, Peter, a very difficult question. Why is Trump doubling down on Greenland so hard, especially where he is today in Davos? So from a political and diplomatic risk perspective, what's this got in store for the US and its European, let's not forget, partners?
Yeah, partners, allies. Doesn't look like that at the moment right now. Address first off the bat, why Davos? Well, they're all in the room. They're all right there. We heard from Trump during the speech when he wanted to have a go at Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General and former Dutch Prime Minister. He shouts out, "Hey, Mark, are you here? Oh, you are. You're down there at the front. I'll give you." It was like watching a stand-up comic at times. Not a particularly good one, but certainly one that was given it its all. He did impressions of Macron. He had a go at him for wearing his glasses. The reason he does it in Davos is because they're all there and they're all there to listen. But this is leverage politics, is what it's called. It's not trade policy. Tariffs are being used here as a bargaining chip, not an economic tool, because there's nothing economic about Greenland. It's all about strategy. And really, it's all about what Donald Trump has in his mind. He has decided he wants Greenland for the US. Everybody else get out the way. Trump, though, in this speech, it was a long old speech. If you ever get the chance to listen to it, it was unlike just about any other political speech I've ever heard. What he said, a lot of it was projecting strength to a domestic audience, to a US audience. It was a lot of, look how great we are, look how good we are, we're better than the rest of them, they all want to follow us. It also shows that he's willing to put pressure on allies as well as rivals. But a lot of that speech was certainly intended for a domestic audience. The tariffs are being used in this way for what I said, something that's not an economic issue, it's a strategic issue. But the tariffs are being used as a way of forcing attention, of sharpening minds onto this. The risk, however, is miscalculation. Markets react far better than even the best diplomats, and once confidence is hit, it can be difficult to restore. That's not just confidence in the markets either. That's confidence in your allies, the confidence your allies have in you. So the unintended outcome is, as you said, higher costs at home and strained alliances that were built for stability. And I think that's one of the more frightening prospects at the moment, is a huge shake-up in what this means for that relationship, that post-World War II relationship between the United States and Europe. And at the moment, it looks a little bit like the US are going, yeah, we're not that bothered. We'll see you guys later. You deal with the problems over that side. We're going to deal with the problems over our side.
I must try this at some point to read The Art of the Deal. So I do keep quoting it and look, I've read little bits and pieces. But he's pretty open, right? If you're in a negotiation, start with the most outlandish, far extreme position you could possibly take, which, I don't know, let's park a navy somewhere. And then from that perspective, if anywhere he moves back towards somewhere in the center of what could be seen to be sensible, will feel like a win to him, which is imperative. And if he wins, you've got to lose. So I've been listening and speaking to people about this. It's not as if it's brand new information that America has paid other countries for bits of the world, right? So
Absolutely. I mean, Alaska was bought from Russia. The whole Louisiana purchase that brought in the United States as we know it, we've bought from France. So it is a thing. And also, it's not new with Greenland, of course. He was very much at pains during that speech to point out, we've been wanting this for a while. And of course, Donald Trump himself said many times in that first term, Greenland was on the list. If I was in the Panama Canal right now, I'd be a little concerned.
From your perspective, you think, why Greenland is so strategically important, right? So it sits on the top of the world and forever, back to Panama Canal, with making things over there in China, shipping it across over here. The fastest way to get there was round the bottom of the world, through the Panama Canal and across. It would appear that it's now that global warming is a thing, that the top of the world, the ice is melting, and it's going to make it easier for these ships to pass across that through the northwest passage, I think it's called. But from his perspective, he can put troops anywhere he likes, right? So that's already agreed. He feels as if he needs to own this piece. That's what feels different. And to hell with NATO. Is that kind of where you're standing as well?
I mean, that's not me saying to hell with NATO. I'm quite happy for a NATO umbrella watching over me at the moment. But what I would say is from Donald Trump, that is from a previous time, from a previous age, and it's not one that he subscribes to at the moment. He thinks that the Europeans, the NATO allies, and not just Europeans, have been derelict in looking after NATO, that they've relied on the US for too long. And as he sees it, he's ringing the changes. Well, before we go any further, a quick bit of housekeeping. Thank you to everyone who's already sent in questions and messages. We really appreciate it, and we'll start building those questions into future episodes very soon.
If you want to get involved, you can find us on Instagram at HMRW Pod, on TikTok at How Money Really Works, and we're also over on YouTube at How Money Really Works Podcast.
And all of the links to our social media you'll also find in the show notes for this episode. Moving on to pensions now and how to save for the future when things right now seem really quite rocky. Market volatility has made long-term planning feel unreliable, even for people doing the right things. Higher interest rates have improved cash returns, but increased uncertainty around growth assets, and uncertainty changes behaviour more than bad news. When people stop trusting projections, they stop planning, or at least they tend to. So, Stephen, when markets move like this and the rules keep shifting, what happens to people's confidence in their retirement plans?
Yeah, I mean, when markets move like this is a key question. I'm forever the dull financial advisor. When was the world ever a mill pond? When was that era when everything was fine and nothing changed and there was no volatility? But the reality, there's always been something. It does feel a bit different this time. But the biggest impact isn't necessarily performance. It's what you alluded to. It's confidence. Most people can live with markets going up and down with a bit of volatility. But if they believe the rules of the game are fair and stable and that the plan still makes sense, when you hear, mentioning them again, you hear Donald Trump completely flipping up the world order, what really knocks confidence is the volatility combined with shifts in tax rules, and we'll probably come on to that a little bit later in the show, around frozen thresholds as well. So people start questioning whether the plan they were told would work still applies, whether what they were told was going to happen to the pension, I'll be able to save until then and I'll get that amount of tax-free cash. That starts to change. Or it's okay, I'll put money in my pension and it won't be affected by inheritance tax. Or somebody keep shifting the goalposts. And at that point, that's when behavior changes happen. I often say that humans, we're tuned to be fight or flight, whether we're running away from a saber-toothed tiger kind of how many millions of years ago. But when it comes to stuff like this, we feel as if we need to make an action. And even if not making that decision doesn't feel like one. So we'll hold more money in cash. They'll put off decisions. The worst thing people can do, really, from my experience, is to completely stop engaging altogether. And the head in the sand ostrich approach very, very rarely is the right one. Ironically, that often does more damage, really, than the actual long-term market movements themselves. So what happens to people's confidence? When there's worry, when there's volatility, humans kind of revert to type and tend to become more cautious. Warren Buffett, of course, once famously said, be fearful when others are greedy, but be greedy when others are fearful. It takes a brave person to follow that strategy. And if you've got a long-term plan and if you're looking for an investment and the horizon is 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, maybe even 20 years, I'm pretty confident, although this does feel a bit different at the moment, that this will be seen as one of those moments in time that will be taught in the history books. Life will move on, but your money has to move with pace with inflation and above that to give you the retirement that you want. From a political perspective, Pete, how much of this uncertainty is accidental? It's just happened. Or how much of it is the result of just short-term decision making?
I think if we were to get into unintended consequences of the current Labour government in the UK, then we would be here for a while, because that's pretty much why they've had all of those U-turns that they've had so far. But this is really policy drift rather than by design. Nobody set out to make it more difficult or more uncertain for people saving for their futures. Governments want you to save for your future. They're desperate for you to do it, particularly in countries like the UK. They want you putting things in private pensions, in private investments. However, decisions are made on short-term budgets, but they're made for long-term consequences, and that's why you end up with this. So you look at the freezing of thresholds, it looks technical, but what it really does is it avoids a difficult conversation about a tax rise, because ultimately that's what it is. It means that the government get to say, we didn't break our promises to avoid raising taxes, but it does it nonetheless. So that's one of those. But each individual change that's made, or not made as it may well be, but each individual change is manageable, but together they just form into a little bit like a snowball rolling down the side of a mountain, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And ultimately, the unintended effect is that people disengage from long-term saving. As you said, perhaps the worst case scenario is that they put their heads in the sand and they find themselves down the line in a far worse position. And all of that came because they stopped trusting what was coming out of the government and what was coming out of the government and feeding into the realities of their personal finances.
We were speaking before as well, Peter. What effect does this have on people's confidence and decisions they make?
Mm.
In real life examples, in the run up to the budget, thankfully in my scenario, not too many people, but I can think of one person in particular. It's in the budget. It's going to be in the budget that Rachel Reeves is going to remove the ability to take tax-free cash from our pension. And I want to get my tax-free cash out now. So let's get ahead of the curve before she announces it and let's make that withdrawal. My advice, always quite very similar, hasn't been announced. I can only give you advice on where we are now. And it might not happen. Actually, it probably won't happen. I really don't think you should do it. That replicated across the country, there will be thousands of people who, because of the noise, because of the rolling of the wicket, because of things being leaked to the press, made actual financial decisions that have seriously impacted their future, and that change didn't happen. So what do people do? They feel backed in a corner, they try to react, and that can have a really long-term impact on their future. So yeah, that's what people do. Worry, react. Hopefully, if people listen to a show like this or reach out to a financial advisor, for a lot of the time, people want a financial advisor, a financial planner, a financial confirmer, and also a financial reassurer, just to make sure, am I making a mistake? So that's all I would say as a plea, is always seek somebody to run these things by.
Absolutely. That's the motto of this show. Do not take anything that we say and then go straight to your investment company and say, I'm making these changes because Peter and Stephen told me to do it. We are not telling you to do that. Always
You know
seek.
what Peter said anyway.
Definitely not. Definitely don't listen to what I said, because as you've listened to the first episode, you will know that if it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't know anything about what's going on with this. So with my status, it turns out I'm all fine because she's really good at it. But, not everybody has a yen yen. Now, one thing that is coming onto the horizon that previously we hadn't seen was people struggling with confidence in the system a bit in looking towards placing their assets in trusts. Now, a trust is a structure where assets are held by someone else and managed for your family's future. Traditionally, these were only used by very wealthy families. You're talking about people with assets of several £1 million, large property or business portfolios as well. What advisors are now seeing, according to reporting in Reuters and the Times, is interest from households who've got total assets of roughly £500,000 to £1.5 million, often tied up in one family home or pensions, and around £50,000 to £150,000 in accessible cash savings. These aren't people who are trying to avoid tax aggressively. They're people planning defensively because those frozen thresholds and rising asset values mean they no longer trust the rules to stay the same. Stephen, when ordinary families start setting up trusts, which to me seems like a very extreme measure, what does that tell you about how secure people feel financially and who should be worried and who shouldn't?
As ever, the last part of your question is really good, Pete. Who should be worried and who shouldn't? I'll come on to that. What does it tell me? It tells me that there's low confidence, and worries and concerns have really come to the fore. They've shifted. And you're right, trusts used to feel like something about real supreme wealth with complexity and the Duke of Westminster. And these are the types of things going back to feudal times. These are things that very wealthy people used to protect their assets, and that didn't feel fair. That was the sensation from the mass public. Like I said, now we're seeing people become with fairly normal, or what could be perceived to be fairly normal lives, a family home. They've done some good financial planning. They've put some money into a pension. The financial advisor did a silly thing and it actually started to grow and it's become more money. And they thought, I'll put some money into savings accounts. And now they're looking at the values at which inheritance tax is charged, and it's starting to affect them. So I guess a good place to start would be, what is inheritance tax? When is it paid? What are the limits? And hopefully I can reassure some people that they don't need to worry about something, but perhaps force the agenda for other people to start considering it.
So, Stephen, what is inheritance tax? When does it come in and who pays it?
So inheritance tax begins to be paid above £325,000 worth of assets per individual. £325,000. Now, if we use an example of a Mr. and a Mrs. or a partner and a partner who are married and they live in a house and they have 2 children, the way it works with a married couple is Mr. has £325,000 allowance and Mrs. has £325,000. We can do the math, Pete. You could add that up. That's 600.
650, 650. Yes.
Well done. We were in the same math class. So 650,000 pounds. Plus, this is where it sounds a little bit complicated, but we will arrive at a single number in a second. So please bear with me. There's also something catchily explained as the residence nil rate band. It basically means if you own your house and it's where you live, your residential property, and upon your death, the intention is to pass it to direct descendants, sons, daughters, stepchildren, not a cousin or a nephew. It needs to be direct descendants. You also get an allowance of £175,000 on top of that 325. So let's add that up again. £325,000 plus £175,000. That's 500 grand. For a Mr. and a Mrs., that's £1 million. So the short answer, if a mum and a dad have an estate worth less than £1 million, if they add everything up, they possibly own their house, their savings, their pensions, cars, whatever they've got, and it adds up to less than £1 million, you don't have an inheritance tax problem. Now, from that perspective, some people listening might go, but doesn't things increase over time? That allowance hasn't changed for in excess of a decade. And of course, life gets more expensive, assets grow. Back to that fiscal drag, Peter, it really means that regular people who have worked hard, they've done the right things, it depends upon where they are in the country, your house could be worth pushing on to £1 million and you've just sat there for 30 years. So that's what's really changed is the individuals are the same people who wouldn't have been affected before for old-fashioned death duties for the very, very rich people. But because assets are increasing and the allowances aren't, more people are being dragged into it. Now, trusts, how can trusts be used? This, I've got to be very careful here. What did I say? Not financial advice, financial education. You're allowed to start gifting some of your money away. You can do that whenever you like. So the way that a trust can work is you gift an amount of your estate. Cash makes it easier than houses, but that's as an example. And if you live for more than 7 years, that's another important rule, that gift will fall outside of your estate. So trust planning really means that you can put an amount of money into a pot over here, ring fenced for your family, like you mentioned. And if you survive for more than 7 years, that gift falls outside of your estate and no longer forms part of the inheritance tax calculation. Clearly, that is a really big deal. Lots of advice needs to be taken. You need to understand the limitations, the fact that that money doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to your children, but just not yet. So yes, more people are using trusts, but there's multiple types and multiple scenarios come with a lot of limitations, and you really need to understand what they might be for your scenario. Politically though, Pete, what does it say when people no longer trust tax rules to stay stable?
The fact that people are turning to trusts, it suggests a breakdown in trust, not just trust in the tax rules, but really in the promises that have been put out by the government, promises of stability. When people plan defensively, and particularly as defensively as this, it means they expect the rules to change again, perhaps quietly and not transparently. They're not expecting this to be the headline news that's out there and clear steps being taken how to rectify it. Trusts becoming mainstream shows policy is pushing behaviour. It's not guiding it. It's not about avoidance at all, people turning towards trusts the way they are now. It's about control in an uncertain system. The risk for policymakers, though, is that complexity replaces confidence and that weakens consent. Because if there is a way to get around some of this inheritance tax in a legal way using trusts, people will go for that, no matter how complicated it is. And when things get complicated, that is, of course, when mistakes get made and people fall between the cracks. It's not a great route to to be going down because, well, while a trust may be the right thing for somebody, the idea that people are looking at it isn't wonderful, because what it does show is it shows a lack of belief in the system that exists.
I think one thing I must stress as well, because they seem opaque. It seems like something that's underhand. Tax planning and tax avoidance and tax evasion are all very different things. Tax planning is using the rules that are in place, allowances that the government have said you're allowed to use. That's the important thing. When people say, I'm going to hide this, give it to somebody else, move offshore, that's moving into the worlds of aggressive tax planning and aggressive evasion. Trusts don't have to be, when used correctly, for the right reasons. And that's all I'd say really on this is people, if they're thinking about it, really it isn't even just financial advisors. It's where we link up with solicitors as well. So getting the right team around you is really super important to make sure that from a tax perspective, you're doing the right thing. But from an estate perspective, who do you want to get access to your money when you're not here? Always make sure you've got a good team around you, financial advisor, accountant, and a solicitor, and have that joined up approach. Don't try to do any of this by yourself, please.
Yeah, we can't stress that enough. Thank you very much. Moving on now to something you brought to my attention earlier this week, Stephen, left me absolutely shocked. There is a point in the UK tax system where earning more money potentially makes far less sense. It sits just above £100,000 and it catches out far more people than most realise. Which brings me, Stephen, to asking you, can you explain in simple terms, really simple, it's for me, remember, what the 100 grand tax trap actually is, how it works in practice, and why people earning what sounds like is a really good salary should care about it?
So it is a good salary. It is something that's aspirational. That's a really important thing to say. It's not a case of who's worked harder than anybody else. Clearly, though, you've got £100,000. Depending upon where you are in the country, that's a phenomenal amount of money. But of course, in different parts of the country, life is more expensive. So what is the £100,000 tax trap? Between, and we can go to the whys and wheres for a different time probably, because there's a whole show about what you can and can't do. If you earn more than £100,000, for every £2 that you earn above that threshold, £1 is removed from your personal allowance. So the British government's very generous, Peter. You're allowed to earn £12,570 before you have to pay any tax. Everybody. That's everybody. Unless, of course, you happen to earn more than £100,000. Because at that point, do it again, every £2 you earn, £1 gets removed from that personal allowance. That steadily rises until you hit the magic number, or not so magic, of £125,000. By the time you get to £125,000 worth of salary or profit as a sole trader, where you've taken that as dividends, you've lost all of your personal allowance, which means on the 6th of April, you think of it like this, you pay tax immediately on everything you earn with no bit at the bottom. That's what the £100,000 tax trap is. And your effective rate of tax basically means 60%. So we all think that there's a 20% tax bracket, a 40% tax bracket, an additional tax bracket of 45%. Those with the broadest shoulders, Peter. However, it's a
I don't know why you're looking at me.
it's a non-advertised or campaigned against 60% rate. So that's what it is. It's hard to get a very small violin out and say boo-hoo for the people who earn all that money. But depending upon how that's split, and this is where I guess it could be a whole or half an episode about how we can do this. You might have one person, wife earns £125,000, has a baby, goes back to work, dad takes time off work, she's still getting £125,000. However, they lose childcare allowance, they lose child benefit. They're also in that bit where I'm doing all this and I don't spend time with my family. It's one of us with one salary. It doesn't feel fair when you explain it like that. And nobody, no economist or no chancellor would start with that as the starting point. It's a throwback to, I think if we go back far enough, it actually goes back to Alistair Darling. It was something that happened and they haven't changed it because of fiscal drag. One thing I will add is you can do things about that, and it involves pensions. a contribution to a pension can reduce your income. You haven't, but it actually can fall below that floor. So that's one thing people can consider. But again, you need to seek financial advice to talk about those things. But that is what the £100,000 tax trap is. How to avoid it, the only small amount of things you can do. I guess nobody would start there, Peter. How do we end up with a tax system where earning more could actually feel like a penalty, or is it being told off for doing well? Why has it been allowed to drift this far?
Look, no government sits down and goes, do you know what? Shall we try and tax people 60%? Because
No government.
no government would do. No government, certainly no government in the UK, is coming in with that as a manifesto pledge. The unintended consequence, though, is a feeling that working harder doesn't lead to progress, which is really dangerous in the long run, because that's just decimates GDP figures growing. It decimates growth. It decimates a feeling of positivity, because if you think, all right, if I work this extra bit, or I do this extra bit, or I study for this course so I'm more qualified, I could get a few extra quid in my bank account. You might have to check it and go, oh, actually, no, it would put me into this bracket, which means I'd actually be paying more tax. That is where it becomes dangerous, because that turns people off from wanting to drive the country forward.
So if the economy feels harder than it used to, that's not just in your head. The rules have shifted, the margins are tighter, and the pressure is real. Our job is to help you see those rules more clearly.
We'll help you make sense of it the best we can, without the panic, and in a language we can all understand.
If you have a question, a situation, or a personal story that you want us to look at, please do get in touch.
You can find us on Instagram at HMRW Pod, on TikTok at How Money Really Works, and on YouTube at How Money Really Works Podcast. All the links are in the show notes.
And if you are listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, please rate the show. It really helps more people find us, and we really appreciate that.
Do make those ratings 5 stars, of course, though, if you see fit. The news isn't getting any simpler, but we're going to be here to help you through it. See you all next week.
Bye-bye. See you next week.